Committee. This meeting is now called to order at 12:59 p.m. Please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. We will now begin meeting with a roll call of all members.
All right, I will go down the list alphabetically by agency. Raquel Schatz, Apache Junction.
Here.
Stephen O'Brien, ADOT. Raj Thowdam, Avondale. John Willett, Buckeye. John McFarland, Chandler.
Yeah, I'm present.
Jennifer Acuna, FHWA. Christopher Salas, Florence. Susanna Struble, proxy for David Fabiano, Gilbert. Randy Proch, Glendale. Brian Harville, Goodyear.
Present.
Keith Dranaski, Litchfield Park.
Present.
Scott Nodes, Maricopa.
Present.
Angela Macaluso, McDot.
Present.
Maria Angelica Deeb, Mesa.
Present.
Jerry Cooper, Paradise Valley. Charles Andrews, Peoria.
Here.
Leticia Vargas, Phoenix. Christopher Wanamaker, Pinal County.
Present.
Brad Novacek, Queen Creek.
Present.
Jennifer Jack, Salt River Pima, Maricopa Indian Community. Vice Chair Domi, Scottsdale.
Present.
Dana Alciani, Surprise.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Thank you. Corey Steele, Tempe.
Present.
Gabriella Elias, proxy for Jamie McCracken, Tolleson. Apologize if I said that correctly.
Gabriel Elias, present.
Gabriel Elias, thank you. Grant Anderson, Youngtown. Did I miss anyone? Anyone that did not?
Steve O'Brien from ADOT.
Thank you.
Randy Proch, Glendale.
Thank you.
Leticia Vargas, City of Phoenix.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ryan. Item number 2 is the call to the audience. MAG provides the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda, informational items or items on the agenda for discussion and not for action. Members of the public are invited to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with the committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the call to the audience?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did not receive any written comments for the call to the audience or any other items on the agenda. A public comment report was sent out prior to the meeting stating that.
Thank you. Item number 3 is the MAG staff report. This item is on the agenda for information and will be presented by Patrick Stone, MAG Transportation Funding Program Manager. Patrick?
Thank you, Chair, members of the Street Committee. Very brief staff report this month, 2 items. First, as you may have noticed, Ryan Barber with MAG is now assisting with the Street Committee, so he's going to be helping out roll call, quorum, all those items. So appreciate him stepping up and assisting us with this. And then secondly, an item we took through Last fall, the federal fund advancement, we will be taking the first round of requests starting at Transportation Review Committee this month in March, with consideration by Regional Council next month in April. We did receive 3 requests, and staff recommendation will be to fund those requests. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. Item number 4 is the approval of the February 13th, 2024 meeting minutes. Does any member of the committee have any questions regarding the minutes? Hearing none, prior to the approval of the meeting minutes, there is an opportunity for members of the public to comment. Staff, have we received any online written comments for this item?
Mr. Chair, we have not.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to approve agenda item number 4? Please state your name and organization when you call out.
Mani Hilke Adib.
Can I have a second?
City of Apache Junction, Raquel Schapp, second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. We will have those participating in the meeting take part in a voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We need to see the faces of everyone to participate in the voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on the camera. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so that staff can count the people's names whose cameras are not on. So proceeding to that, can I have a voice vote? Those in favor, please say aye.
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 And we'll go a few minutes here to get everybody's name down. And Ryan, you can just let me know when you're ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're all good.
Those opposed say nay. Hearing none. Members, please leave your cameras on. Ryan, can you please take roll call of the members who did not turn on their camera?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Charles Andrews,
Aye.
Brad Novacek.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion passes unanimously. No nays.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 4, Prop 479 Implementation Overview and Roadmap. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Patrick Stone, MAG Transportation Funding Program Manager. Patrick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Street Committee. Pleasure to present this item. One moment while I share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see my screen at this point.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can't see the members attending the meeting at this point as I share my screen. Anyhow, as I said, pleasure to be here to introduce, to present this item today to the Street Committee. So before I get into the presentation itself, I'd like to take a moment to kind of reflect on what this presentation is about, how we've gotten to where we are, and that really starts with a recap of the Regional Investment Plan. The Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or RSTIP, was unanimously approved by Regional Council back in June of 2021. Subsequent to that, last summer, Senate Bill 1102 was passed by the legislature, signed by Governor Hobbs. MAG staff took through an item to put those conforming changes associated with Senate Bill 1102 into the RSTIP. That was approved in September last year. And to note, as you see on the bottom of the screen, all things about the RSTIP serve as the basis for the improvements funded through Prop 479, also known as the extension of Prop 400. So the map on the screen here, I think, does a really good job of kind of showing the regional significance of the investment plan. You can see it's across multiple categories, jurisdictionally covers the entire region. Of note, you can see there are specific improvements associated with the freeway program, additional funding for high capacity transit, and of top of mind for this committee, improving over 1,000 miles of new or improved arterial roadways. In addition, at the bottom, you also note investments in safety, emerging technologies, ITS, and non-motorized transportation. This is the investment plan by the numbers. A couple things to point out on this slide. First and foremost, lower right-hand corner, the funding makeup of that. Oftentimes we talk about Prop 479 or the extension of Prop 400 and that regional component, the half-cent sales tax. A significant portion, over half of the regional funding. That being said, not the only source of funds that makes up what is the investment plan. And then in the lower left-hand corner, which we'll go into in subsequent slides, an investment in programmatic categories. So instead of just programming all of the funding specifically to projects, an amount has been set aside in the program categories you see on the screen, really reflecting the understanding that we need to be flexible and responsive to an ever-changing future. You can see there are multiple categories of funding, and we'll be talking about those coming up. So I wanted to use this slide to kind of set an anchor point of some future slides. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm just noticing now that, again, this slide deck has been used for a couple presentations. I have a mistake you'll see in a moment. But this really is kind of where we are and where we're going to go. As you can see, the timeline says we're in February. We're now in March, but this was when the first presentation was done. I might neglected to update the slide. But you can see we're essentially sitting here in March of 2024. Later this calendar year in November, voters in Maricopa County will consider the ballot proposition for 479 to extend the half-cent sales tax, move forward a year in time, and we look at the end of Proposition 400, both the funding programs and the policies, ending on December 31st, 2025. Fast forward one day, and assuming the successful passage of Prop 479, we would be looking at the start of Proposition 479 on January 1st, 2026. And why this slide is critical, we're sitting 2 years out from Prop 479, and that sounds like a bit of time, but in the world of transportation, 2 years can essentially seem like just tomorrow. So why are we talking about the implementation prior to the vote this November? Well, there's really two specific considerations. The first, we're going to talk about those capital projects, those investments on our roadway networks. And then in addition, also some brief conversations about transit and transit service. First, I'll start with the capital projects. Hopefully this should be familiar to a lot of the members of the committee here, project development process. So really where this starts, you look at the scoping and environmental. This is the high level design, the DCR or design concept report, a PA. Essentially this identifies at a high level what the project is and any federally required environmental processes that are needed. Concurrently, you move into two different spots. That's developing the final design, the plan specs and estimates. In addition, dealing with any needed utility locations or right-of-way acquisitions required for the project. Ultimately, all of that has to be completed, prior to moving to construction. So using that framework from the previous slide, I've got a couple slides to show a development timeline and the time it takes to actually get to construction. So this first one looks at those projects associated with our Freeway Lifecycle Program, or FLCP. Of note on the screen, there are two colored boxes. The blue one is that scoping environmental, that high level phase, and then the gray boxes represent that design right-of-way utility phase. Of the 5 projects put on the screen, you can only see one project would meet the timeline of 2 years, which is essentially what we're looking at prior to the start of Prop 479. That project was a somewhat simpler bridge replacement at I-17 and Central Avenue. All other projects on there, as you can see, significantly go beyond a 2-year window, and especially looking at the 303, moving into upwards of a decade to get those projects finalized for construction. Turn attention to something a little more topical to the street committee. Arterial projects, a little closer to that 2-year threshold, but again, still, you see projects that do take longer to design and develop. One thing to note on this slide, I think of interest, is as you start at the top, you are looking at projects that are 100% regional funded and you slowly move down into a blend of regional and federal, and ultimately at the bottom towards federally funded only projects, which does lengthen the process and the timeline. Finally, the other category are those competitively funded programs or projects, thinking about the arterial bridge, ITS, active transportation, etc. Again, these are smaller projects, hence why we see a few more of the projects closer to or under the timeline of 2 years. But even still, we do have investments here that do take longer than that 2-year frame. Briefly going to talk a little bit about transit service in the portfolio of all things 479. On the screen here is a transit service map. Again, you can see the extent of the transit investments in the region. One thing to note with transit, similar to the highway side, freeway side, arterial side, it's not as simple as just flipping a switch. It does take time to think about implementing or improving transit service. Specifically, a couple of bullet points on this slide here. First and foremost, any service changes that are being contemplated have to be fed into Valley Metro's short-range transit program, or SRTP process. And there's a number of factors included in that. One is, as we know with transit, just like roadways, they aren't normally just jurisdictional specific. They usually come from somewhere, go somewhere. So there's impacts to neighboring jurisdictions. With transit, you also have to have the vehicles to be able to expand or increase service. Along with those vehicles, you must have drivers. And then there's the requirement to provide the federal ADA service. So kind of recapping, why are we talking about implementation before November of 2024? There's really a handful of points to consider. First and foremost, we want to get ahead of the game and ensure our funding is used as efficiently as possible. Time costs money, so there's always the impetus to do things quicker and cheaper. One thing to think about, the projects we talk about, the investments we talk about, they exist because there's a need. The region and our member agencies have said, we need this improvement to provide this benefit to our residents. So the sooner we can get these projects going, the quicker those benefits are realized. Again, reflecting back to transit, allowing Valley Metro and member agencies the time required to identify and implement service changes. And as you no doubt heard, federal funding allocated to the region is user lease. If we have funding that isn't programmed and utilized in a year, it could be lost to the region. No one wants that. So I'll pause briefly, Chair, members of the street committee, to address any questions that anyone might have on the first set of slides.
Do any members have any questions or comments for Patrick? Seeing none, if you want to proceed.
All right, moving forward. So next steps, looking ahead, how do we take this plan and translate it into action? So first, talking about managing the funding at a regional level. As I noted on that earlier slide, there really is a portfolio of investment choices or categories that make up the regional funding. Yes, there's the half-cent sales tax. In addition, though, we have FHWA formula funding, both that allocated through ADOT and that allocated directly to the region, plus the region's share of the Highway User Revenue Fund and FTA formula funds associated with our transit program. Combine those all together, and you get the RSTIP. But the RSTIP is just a plan in and of itself. You have to then have a way to translate that plan into action, and we do that through the concept of management tools. And I think a lot of these will be familiar to the members of the committee. First, as I noted previously, the Freeway Lifecycle Program. This is implemented by our partners at ADOT. We have the Transit Lifecycle Program implemented by both Valley Metro and member agencies. We have an Arterial Lifecycle Program that is just implemented by member agencies. And then finally, we have those competitive programs within the region that are also implemented by member agencies. To start, I really want to focus on the left-hand side of the screen, and the 3 life cycle programs. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into each one of the 3 categories. One thing before I start with this that I think is Helpful to know, the number of life cycle programs has not changed between 400 and 479, so we are at least dealing with a stable space when we look at these major investment categories. First, we'll start with the freeway program. And to begin, I kind of highlight where we're at in space and time with Prop 400 and the freeway lifecycle program. One thing, we know what's going on with the freeway program. We have a defined list of projects. We know when these investments are going to be delivered. So we have a high degree of certainty existing within the freeway program. It does include funding sources, multiple funding sources available to the region, both the half-cent sales tax, the formula funding from FHWA allocated to the region through ADOT, plus our portion of the Highway User Revenue Fund. And one thing to note, and I think this is critical to kind of celebrate successes when you can, we think this will probably be the easiest transition of the 3 life cycle programs for a couple of reasons. First of all, an extensive 40-year partnership with ADOT in delivering these investments. And really that's hand in hand with the second bullet point, which is this is not the first time the region is dealing with a transition of a proposition in regards to the freeway program. Back in the early 2000s, there was the shift from the Prop 300 regional freeway program into Prop 400. And the point to note here that's, I think, critical in delivering the investments in the FLCP. Last fall, decisions were made, approvals were given by regional council to accelerate some of those projects into phase 1 of the investment plan to get those ready to go, specifically final design efforts on both State Route 24 and the first part of State Route 30. So thinking about the freeway lifecycle program, looking ahead, what does that path look like? There's really 2 critical components. To start, first is updating the revenue estimates. The revenue numbers used with the investment plan were developed with the plan back in 2019, 2020. So we need to go back and revisit those numbers, see where those are associated with that. We need to update the project costs. Again, those numbers were created back a few years ago, and especially on this one, kind of emphasizing the last bullet point you see under this block is the number of projects. Updating the estimates for 90 projects is going to be a substantial lift, so we need time and resources to get that done. And ultimately, where those lead us to is developing that implementation schedule for the near-term projects, which specifically we're thinking of our phase 1 and phase 2 in the investment plan. As we look at it right now, and if you looked at our STIP, we have phasing associated with our discrete investments. Those phases are defined as 5-year blocks of time, phase 1 being fiscal years 26 through 30. This will allow us to start sequencing those projects into specific years. When are we going to do this? The intent is for MAG and ADOT to start working on these efforts upon the completion of the 2025 update of the Freeway Lifecycle Program, which will happen later this spring in May. Moving on to the Arterial Lifecycle Program. Again, kind of a reflection of where we're at today in regards to Prop 400, and very similar to the Freeway Program. We know what projects exist still in the Arterial Lifecycle Program. We know what is yet to be funded as investments associated with Prop 400. As noted previously, this only comprises 2 funding sources, the half-cent sales tax and federal formula funding allocated to the region. And an interesting note is that the ALCP was always intended to be a reimbursement program. However, project development has caught up to regional funding. I do like this graphic. I think it does a nice job of kind of showing the transition of Prop 400 ALCP into the Prop 479 ALCP. The keynote is really what's not listed in the bottom right corner, which is the investment portfolio for Prop 479 is now a regional only program. That will certainly have implications on program delivery, project delivery. So we look forward to those conversations on developing what Prop 479 ALCP looks like. So as we think about the transition out of 400 into 479, there's some work still left to be done. Critical will be addressing the policies around the end of the Proposition 400, including how long do we have the funding out there? We know for a fact there are projects scheduled to go to construction in 2026. Those projects will not be completed in 2026. How long do we make funding available to the region to make sure those investments are delivered? And an interesting question also will be, what do we do with the two ALCPs? And should they be kept separate? Should they be kept tracked independently? We just don't know yet. That's still to be determined. Similar to the FLCP, the ALCP, looking ahead, how are we going to get to where we need to be? So first and foremost, we need to develop those policies and procedures associated with Prop 479. And then you'll see two very similar bullets, which are, again, updating those revenue forecasts. Those were done at a time a few years ago, along with the regional funding amounts, thinking about inflationary factors and how they impact the program. And ultimately, again, developing a specific sequencing of projects so that we can start saying within phase one, these projects will go in this order. And how are we going to do this? There's really four key considerations here. The first is we are going to bring together a work group of member agencies to discuss. Two things to be discussed. First, the policy surrounding the end of the Prop 400 ALCP, and then also beginning the development of the Prop 479 ALCP. And as noted at the bottom of the slide, these policies will go through the bank committee process for approval. One thing to note between Prop 400 and Prop 479, the number of agencies with Prop 479 ALCP projects substantially increases. So there's just another layer of coordination and collaboration required. And then finally, going to the transit side of the world and then talking about Prop 400 TLCP, as you've heard 2 times previously, again, we know what service and capital improvements are identified through the end of Prop 400. That being said, we know this will also be the largest transition needed because there are several policy shifts, associated with the transition between the Prop 400 TLCP and the Prop 479 TLCP. And as noted on the final bullet, really it's because currently Valley Metro is responsible for the management and administration of the life cycle program. That will shift over to MAG as part of Prop 479. And quickly kind of go through the transit program. As you see, a number of different investment choices between bus and high capacity. First starting thinking about operating assistance. Big shift here is going to be moving to a performance-based program. So it's going to take MAG in cooperation and coordination with Valley Metro to start initiating the study required to establish the parameters, to transition to that performance-based funding model. Moving on, express bus regional transit facilities. Again, another coordinated effort to update the regional commuter bus feasibility study and market analysis is going to be occurring between MAG and Valley Metro, as well as also planning efforts for location of regional park and ride lots. ADA, Americans with Disability requirements, MAG in coordination with MAG, once again, establishing those regional policies for ADA funding. Really top of mind here, looking at cost containment strategies. ADA service, while federally required, can also be a very pricey part of our transit portfolio. And then finally, looking at regional services, these are things like looking at the fare box system, operations and maintenance facilities, and those will continue to, or excuse me, no, this is, yes, yeah, okay. Apologies, I was getting ahead of myself. Bus purchases, these will continue as is. Currently, MAG funds all bus purchases in the region. However, we will be working with our partners at Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix to start documenting how we determine and decide what the replacements and needs are in bus capital. Bus transit asset management, again, looking at the asset management needs and funding over the life of the program, what will be needed over the TLCP. Preventative maintenance, the RSTIP continues, the Prop 400 era investment, which was to allocate 25% of our Section 5307 funding towards preventative maintenance. And then finally, thinking about high capacity transit, lot of work to be done in the HCT space, specifically developing those policies associated with high capacity transit. Again, as you've heard previously, updating revenue forecasts, regional funding amounts, and again, looking at the implementation schedule for those proposed investments, done with a coordinated effort with Valley Metro and a work group to start running through these processes. Then finally, competitive programs. The last tenet of the RSTIP, we talked about the life cycle programs. So really kind of want to first talk about the difference between Prop 400 and the competitive programs moving into 479. Today, they're all federally funded. Moving into 479, they become a blended funding. There are some that are sales tax funded, quite a few that are hybrid funded, and a couple that are specifically just federally funded. Reason being, there's really kind of three thoughts behind that shift. One, there's been increased demand for these types of investment choices. MAG did a study a couple of years ago, understanding and underscoring that federalizing a project does lead to additional costs, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 50%. And the intent is to, and noted on a previous slide about getting these investments out quicker, we want to allow faster project delivery when it makes the most sense. So an overview of the competitive programs. Currently, the three noted on the left, Bike Ped, Air Quality, and ITS. But you look at Prop 479, and it's a more robust and diverse grouping of categories, non-motorized, air quality. Two that you'll see coming up quickly here, arterial rehabilitation and arterial widening, which includes both also new roadways, funding set aside for emerging tech, ITS carrying over, and then specific investments for improving intersections and safety. So looking ahead with the competitive programs, where do we go from here? So first is going to be, the priority is going to be given to the two exclusively federally funded competitive programs, which are the arterial rehab and arterial widening. To do that, a work group of member agencies is going to be convened shortly to start developing those programmatic policies. And those policies will again be taken through the committee process for consideration, with the intent being to have the call for projects for these two programs scheduled later this year and in the fall. Other considerations to think about as we look ahead, we also have to do some updates of some critical items in the region. Two of them are an update to the active transportation plan, and also developing an update and refresh of the system management and operations plan. Another thing to note is that the region is going to be having policy discussions on transportation safety this spring. You'll start seeing this being just inculcated in everything we're doing. But the hope is that these discussions will help inform the development of the strategic transportation safety plan, while also factoring into all of several of the competitive programs. So summary, I know this is a lot. I'll try to recap it quite succinctly here. Efforts are going to be started soon. Near-term efforts are really going to be focused on technical work and policy framework development. As noted earlier, policy items that we're going to do this spring. First, Prop 400. What does the end of Prop 400 look like? And then, as noted on that prior slide, developing the framework associated with the two new arterial programs. Moving into the fall, we will then be looking at, again, another big policy lift item, which is developing the Prop 479 policies and procedures for the ALCP and the TLCP. And as always, we'll be coming back to our technical and policy committees with updates as needed and warranted. And with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions from yourself or the members of the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Do any members have any questions or comments for Patrick on his presentation?
Patrick, I have one question. This may be, this is Nathan, but from City of Scottsdale, but from this may be a more pessimistic view. Maybe you discussed it and I missed it in the presentation, but if Proposition 479 doesn't pass, are you guys looking at a plan or a strategy for Proposition 400? Does that look different than what you laid out here?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Nathan, good question. Actually, we kind of heard this, a similar questions come up previously. What is the contingency plan if 479 were not to pass? At this point, we're not focused in that space. I think everything we're doing is working on building the framework with the assumption that 479 is successful at the ballot. Should the voters weigh in and it's not successful, then we'll certainly have to develop those contingency plans. One thing to note, and I think that's the value of an investment plan, it identifies all the funding sources available to the region, as you saw in the slides I presented earlier. Irrespective of any decisions, certain fund sources still exist, in any future. So, we have things still to consider and plan towards, but at this point, all efforts are focused on 479.
Thanks, and I'm thinking optimistically too. I just had to ask pessimistically.
No worries. Thank you.
Randy from Glendale?
My dear friend Patrick, you mentioned an update to the active transportation plan. Is there any additional information you can share about timeframes or what that may involve?
Mr. Chair, Randy, I am not quite certain when that active transportation plan update is being conceptualized. I know Ted Brown, our transportation planning and performance program manager, is online. So Ted, I don't know if you might have additional comments into that space.
All I can offer you, Randy, is summer.
Of 24?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Maria?
Yes, thank you, Maria Angelica with the City of Mesa. So I have a question. I know MAG is looking at potentially including projects where agencies compete for funding within MAG. Have there been any considerations on member agencies applying outside of MAG for those that are direct with USDOT and the bill, the infrastructure bill? And can an agency piggyback on the new Prop 479 in their development of those important projects?
Thank you, Chair, members of the Street Committee, Maria and Angelica. I want to make sure I understand your question correctly so I don't inadvertently answer it incorrectly. The question is, member agencies do look at and compete for funding outside of that, which is programmed by MAG, most specifically usually through DOT discretionary grants. And I think your question is, are there going to be opportunities to potentially leverage the programmatic investments included in the RSTIP along with those discretionary grants? Do I have that kind of correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So, for example, if we want to go for a race grant or we want to go for a direct HSIP, will there be a potential for us to leverage the Prop 479 and develop our projects like that and fund the projects that way?
Yeah, great question, Maria Angelica. At this point, those policy considerations still have to be developed. I would say as we reach out to member agencies and have those conversations, certainly a great point to bring forward is how do we look at projects that may have multiple funding sources, both from within and without or outside of the region. But at this point, too early to tell. We have yet to really get into the policy framework discussion, but a good point to consider.
Are there any other questions or comments?
This is Angela from the county, from Maricopa County, sorry. I just had a question. You had alluded that you're looking to do call for projects in fall. I'm assuming that's ahead of November being fall. And will you be providing guidance on what that means? Again, not to be pessimistic, like Nathan said, if it doesn't pass at that time, of how that call for projects will actually work?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the Street Committee, Angela, a good question and a good opportunity to kind of reflect back. The reason why we're actually looking at those two particular programs, the arterial rehab and arterial widening, is because they're solely federally funded. Those federal funds are still going to be with it in the region irrespective. So we have to start programming those funds. And what we're really looking at with those two programs is to start programming for fiscal years 26, 27, and 28. But we know there's a certainty in that fund source and in those programs. So hence why we want to get started this fall, because the outcome of the vote shouldn't impact the development of those two programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 6, which is SunCloud Data Portal. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by Ted Brown, MAG Transportation Planning and Performance Program Manager. Ted?
Good afternoon, Chair Christo, members of the Street Committee. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the Arizona SunCloud. Just a second to make sure my screen is proper here. Excellent. I'll take you through what the SunCloud is, some of our more innovative data layers, and I'll end with a very quick demonstration of the tool itself. So what is the SunCloud? The SunCloud is the title of an Accelerated Innovation Deployment Grant project that was originally awarded in 2017. ADOT, MAG, SCMPO, and a slew of other partners were awarded $1 million to develop a data portal to increase and improve the accessibility, usability, and quality of data and analytical tools for transportation planning. Now, the overall goal of the project was to better understand the needs in the corridor and help align policies and strategic investment. But one side benefit that we heard from our partners over and over during the project is what an enormous help this was, particularly for our rural communities, as this provides high-quality data sets across an entire study area. For our project, the Sun Corridor, or that study area, refers to 5 counties in southern Arizona. We have Maricopa, Pinal, Pima, Santa Cruz, and Cochise counties. Those counties cover a bit more than 30,000 square miles of land and somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of the state's population. We needed many hands to make light work, so we started a coalition, a robust team of stakeholders that included all of the MPOs and COGs in the region. We had county agencies and, of course, our partners at ADOT and FHWA. Over the next 5 years, MAG led the team that developed and implemented the SunCloud data portal. So I want to touch on some of the data layers that we have in the tool. We have 22 distinct data layers in the final platform. I obviously can't cover all of them, but I will say that we cover all the traditional transportation data sets that you would imagine, from traffic counts to model data to asset condition. However, this being an accelerated innovation deployment grant, we did have to do some innovating. And so I just want to highlight 3 data layers that we think really help move the needle forward. The first up is safety. So we've applied methodology from the Highway Safety Manual to help identify areas where opportunities exist to implement impactful solutions. And to do that, we've had to combine our crash data from ADOT with travel demand model AADTs and the best available safety performance functions. Now, the ability to evaluate projects based on something other than just crash rate or the total number of crashes is a step forward, and the ability to evaluate projects based on a predictive methodology is a huge leap forward for us. Next up is the disadvantaged facility users layer. So before this tool, all of our equity scores were based on proximity. You are near a community of concern, so you get the points that go with that. That's a less than ideal methodology, as it doesn't take into account who's actually using the roadway in question. So instead, we partnered with Replica and essentially had them run a select link analysis on each segment within the network. Now, what that means is we get a report that for each roughly 1 mile segment that tells us the number of users of that segment and the home location of those users. From there, we can combine that data with our disadvantaged community information, and with those 2 pieces of the puzzle, we can calculate the percentage of roadway users that have a home location in a disadvantaged community. That's a monumental step forward in terms of how we can score equity. And here's an example on the screen of how this change in methodology can help us better do better evaluations in our region. This block near South Extension Road doesn't tick any of the disadvantaged community boxes. However, all of the blocks around it do. In our old analysis, a project on this segment would have received a low equity score, but using our new analysis method, we can show that over 70% of the people who use this roadway on a daily basis have a home location in a disadvantaged community. And next up, we have pavement condition. Now, Meg went through an extensive exercise where we collected pavement condition data from all 27 cities and towns and our 3 native nations to produce an arterial pavement condition layer. Frankly, it was a lot of work. Our agencies used 7 different pavement condition methodologies, and it all had to be crosswalked. It represented different time periods. It was quite the puzzle to put together. Nevertheless, we wanted to use the same methodology for the SunCloud, but quickly realized we were playing a much different ball game. So we turned to Wejo and more directly to their partner Near Dynamics for a solution. They provided a third-party data solution to our problem. Now, this data set has a lot of advantages for us, namely in that it's collected uniformly across the region. Every single roadway that is functionally classified as an arterial or above is covered. That is particularly useful for those agencies who may not have access to a LiDAR van or a pavement truck on the regular basis. This is also a very recent data set. We've limited our purchase to the last 12 months. So uniformly collected, very recent pavement condition data for our entire region. So what can you actually do with the SunCloud? Well, this platform was designed for maximum flexibility, but also ease of use. So we've tried to incorporate many common and useful tools that you may see in other platforms, but we had some specific goals that we set out to accomplish. First being, we wanted you to be able to symbolize multiple attributes. And by that, I don't mean just switching between layers. I mean switching the symbolization within a layer. And I'll show you an example of that here in just a minute. You can also filter the data either by attribute, saying I only want to see roadways that have more than 50 crashes, or by geography. So you could say I only want to see my city, my county, my MPO. And finally, we wanted you to get that information out of our tool, whether that be through printing a display map so that you can export it to a PDF that you can include in a report or an email, or exporting that data directly so you can continue your analysis in the software of your choice. Now, our motto throughout this project was this old quote about different strokes for different folks. And this is kind of the culmination of that. So out of the box, we've provided some weighting recommendations that are based on nationwide best practices and our professional judgment. But we knew that with a dozen agencies involved in the creation of the tool and covering the land area of dozens of additional agencies, there was no way we were going to successfully land on one weighting scheme that would make everybody happy. So instead, we've built a widget where you can set your own weights on the fly in your browser and rescore the entire 5-county area. If bridges aren't important to you, you can set that one to 0 and rerun it. If you think reliability is a more important factor in new capacity projects, you can crank reliability up, hit rescore, and away you go with a bespoke set of weights that are tailored to your needs or values. We're very, very proud of the flexibility that this feature provides to our users. And with that, I'd like to jump over to just a quick demonstration of the tool. So this is the landing page of the SunCloud. It's currently displaying the pavement roughness index or our pavement condition layer. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over to our safety data layer. What we're now seeing is the excess expected high severity crashes in our region. I'm going to change the symbolization of that over to bicycle and pedestrian, fatal and severe injuries. So we're now seeing that on the screen instead. And then I'm going to go up here to my filters. I'm going to select a boundary type. In this case, I'll pick city. And I'm going to pick on Chandler today. So I will scroll down to Chandler. When I do that, it's going to zoom into the city of Chandler. It'll get rid of all of the extraneous information on the map, so you get a really clean map for Chandler. I'm going to go ahead and change our background to something that might show up just a little bit better here. If we go over to the right side of the screen, I can now print this map into a PDF, or I can see my table view, so I can see the underlying information that I'm seeing on the screen. From here, I can also export this data into a JSON, a CSV, you name it. However you'd like to consume this information, we can output it. I can also click on individual segments on the map and get additional attribute information about that segment in particular. Being that I'm on the safety layer, we're seeing things like the number of impaired driving crashes, the number of injuries, the crash rates, the level of safety service. All of the individual layers will have unique attributes that go with it that you can explore. From there, I would like to give a kind of an example of how you could use this tool, particularly for, let's say, a notice of funding opportunity that might come down from the federal government. Let's say we have a NOFO coming out that is really, really plugged into quantitative scoring criteria. And let's say they really are interested in bicycle and pedestrian fatalities. We'll do pavement roughness. and let's say reliability. So I can go in here and I can move all of my widgets to match the weighting of the NOFO or whatever I'm trying to evaluate. When I do that, all of the sliders will automatically adjust, so I always stay at 100. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and hit rescore. Now the screen's going to flash, and then it's going to provide a completely updated layer that's based on the weighting that we just selected. So from here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can get a better picture here. I can go ahead and hide this layer so I can see how it changed from the base map. I don't know how well this is going to show up virtually, but it'll change based on the new weights that we selected. I can export this either as an image, or I can export the entire layer so that I can go continue this analysis in the software of my choice. Switching back over to the presentation, wanted to give you just some useful links here. So here's the main site. Here's our informational site. We also have a training video towards the end of the project. We spent about 75 minutes with all the project partners clicking through every single button on that tool so you can understand what they all do and how they work. Finally, if you're extra nerdy, we have the entire code repository hosted on a Bitbucket. You can go there, you can fork that repository, steal the things you like, cut the things you don't, and host your very own SunCloud. Before I wrap up, I do want to just address the question that I get asked the most after giving this presentation, and that is there a plan to keep this platform up to date? The short answer is not presently. The longer answer is most of the data in this platform will stay useful and relevant for multiple years. Some data sets like bridge condition aren't going to change dramatically on an annual or multi-year basis. However, some of the more useful layers do have a shelf life. So we are continuously looking for opportunities to fund the upkeep and maintenance of this platform. We recently identified a federal grant opportunity that we think this fits into very well, and have already submitted an application for that. However, now is definitely a great time to be learning about the SunCloud, as we estimate we have another 8 to 12 months or so before we'll really need to dig in and start updating and refreshing some of these data sets. Chair Christo, that completes my presentation, and I'm certainly available for any questions.
Thank you, Ted. Do any members have questions or comments for him?
Yes, this is Maria. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's awesome. So you did mention that some data sets will not be updated or can't easily update. Can you mention some, and if member agencies can provide or ADOT can provide some information? Have you looked at that, finding cooperation and partnership with others?
Chair Christo, members of the Street Committee, Ms. Deeb, great question. We have a working group of all of the participants in the first round of the SunCloud that meets every couple of months or so to discuss that very question. Some of the layers that will run out of usefulness, I should say, would be that disadvantaged facility users layer. That one is probably one that requires updating annually. The pavement condition layer is another one. That is a rather expensive layer to put together or to purchase. But to further answer your question, we do have high hopes for our federal grant application. Should that fall through, I can say that MAG is committed to at least updating the layers that we have that come from federal data sources to a statewide platform. And then we will continue that conversation for the layers that do require some kind of third-party data purchase with the partners here. ADOT was very, very involved in the creation of this platform with us, and they too continue to look for opportunities where we could perhaps find some funding to make those third-party data purchases.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ted. All right, moving on to item number 7, request for future agenda items. Are there any requests from the membership for any item on a future agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item number 8, comments for the committee. Are there any comments or announcements from the membership?
Sorry, yes, this is Maria with the City of Mesa. So I know that you gave us a highlight that you are developing a working group. Do you have any idea on what timeframe you're looking at and what considerations will you open it to all members within the LCP and the Prop 479? Just a little bit more of detail on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the street committee, Maria. Yeah, the intent is hopefully in the next few weeks to convene the ALCP working group specific to the end of Proposition 400, most focused on that working group that currently exists within that within the ALCP. And then, as noted in the presentation, later this fall will be the development of the 479 policies and procedures. That will be convening a larger working group. The intent is to ensure all member agencies actually have a voice on policy development, that they're at the table. So the intent is to make sure we provide opportunities to everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there any other comments or announcements? Seeing none, the next meeting of the street committee will be on Tuesday, April 9th at 2024 at 1 p.m. And with no further business, today's meeting